Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. I am your host, Wendy Nystrom, and today I am joined with two wildfire experts. I have Ralph Bloemer, he is the Director of Fire Safe Communities, and Jesse Alexander, who is the Fire Chief for the Yuba City Fire Department. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us, Wendy.
Thank you.
Of course. And wildfire is on the tip of everyone's tongue lately. Right now, the East Coast is under a cloud of smoke in New York. First time they've really ever experienced that, something us West Coasters are actually, unfortunately, getting used to. So, Ralph, if you could just go into some detailed information, but keep it simple. We like to keep it simple. What is causing all of these massive explosion of wildfires we're seeing lately?
Well, what I've learned over the last 20 years working with fire scientists and working on a documentary about wildfire that we just completed after 5 years of work and spending time with folks in the field is that, the most destructive fires are the ones that are burning communities, are wind events, drought events where there's a lot of energy release potential. In other words, the soil moisture is really low.
Yeah.
And these are fast moving events that are very much linked to over space and time, the climate, right? They have a huge climate signal, how much fire we have on the land. Of course, another component is people starting them or them being started by lightning. And people starting them ranges from, someone with a campfire to a power line that fails in a wind event. The ones that we're seeing right now from Canada, a lot of those are burning in areas that have been previously cut. And so they're dense plantations. Those tend to burn hotter. But really, it's because of drought and wind that you'll get fire move long distances and burn a lot of land. If there is conditions where it's a little bit more moisture, intermittent rain, right, then you just get a different result. So, some people are saying it's more fire than they've seen ever, and then they're measuring that by their human life scale. If you go back in the historical record, not too far, you see similar amounts of fire. And people predict and expect that we're going to get more. So then the question becomes, knowing that reality, what do we do with that? But I think the sum total is we can kind of expect more fire on the land in future years and more smoke. And we're not going to probably be able to reduce it. Fortunately, those are pulses, right? They're not chronic. And so we can prepare. We can have smoke kits. We can have filters at home. It's kind of like, what we just learned to do in 2020 painfully, wear masks some of the time. I personally, living in Oregon, I have a smoke kit. Okay. I carry it with me. I have it ready for the summer. I just checked it 3 days ago with my family.
Could you explain what a smoke kit is and what it contains?
Well, we have a couple different things. We have filters in the house, but we have a kit if it gets really bad. It was 600 parts per million here in 2020. And we were in level 2 evac in our community in the outskirts of the city of Portland. And it was 600 ppm for many days. That's not okay with the small particles that can enter your bloodstream. So it's good to have an N95 or greater, properly fitted mask if you have to work outside. We have work on an orchard sometimes, and we have people that work on an orchard. And so that's oftentimes smoke season is picking season. So there's people that have to work outside. I know Jesse works outside, right? And many people do. So I think that there's other components there. It gets a little bit more complicated. But in essence, have some modicum of preparedness for your lungs.
I love the fact you brought up people who work outside, because a lot of people sitting at their home or sitting in an office, sitting at a desk, probably don't really think about people who are outside constantly working. And so when there's a smoke situation or a wildfire, they just close their window and they say, oh, it'll pass, the wind will blow. This affects people, their health, mental health, as well as physical health. And Jesse, you're seeing a lot with wildfire. You're a fire chief. What are you seeing in your personal observations with respect to wildfires?
Well, wildfires are affected by 3 different categories. You have topography, weather, and fuels. And topography, for the most part, unless it's going into a different area, that doesn't really change. But what we are seeing is changing is, especially with those we'll consider catastrophic fires, it's your weather, just like Ralph was saying, the wind events, but not necessarily the type of fuels, but the fuel moistures. We noticed, at least on my level, I noticed that when we have those mega fires, it's critically low live and dead fuel moistures. And we can anticipate that going out, that we're going to see erratic fire behavior. Absolutely, things have changed. In 2017, I was on the Thomas Fire. I thought that would be it was at the time the largest wildland fire in California. And I thought that was going to be the largest fire. As of now, and that was 2017, it's listed as ninth as the largest wildfires. So that's what the type of fires that we're starting to experience over and over, and not just the increase in size, but also the increase in severity.
So, I mean, we've seen this with the wildfires, and we're seeing it's no more fire seasons. We're seeing now year-round wildfires. We're seeing it getting hotter and drier. So this is unfortunately going to be a bit of a new normal that we have to deal with these wildfires. Ralph, could you explain methodologies, actually both of you, Jesse and Ralph, methodologies with respect to mitigating it or stopping it before it starts, or how to prepare yourself to deal with this?
Yeah, I would just say that, a 1,000,000-acre fire perimeter like Jesse's been on, the Dixie Fire or the Thomas Fire, right? You're talking about some areas within it that are unburned. And I just want to let people know they're concerned about, what's happening in the forest.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go to these areas, and I've spent extensive time documenting wildlife and wildfire recovery with time-lapse photography. And, a lot of these landscapes have historically, since the retreat of the ice sheets in the Pleistocene, burned at high severity and high intensity. That's how they burn. Some of them have burned at low and moderate. Sometimes it's mixed. So don't think, people, that within a fire perimeter, it's destroyed, in terms of the forest or the landscape or the vegetation. It can be changed. In some cases, they're pretty big. If it's a fire on top of a fire in a previously managed area, it can burn really hot, and there can be changes. There's nuance in there. But I just want to assure folks that are thinking about the place around them and what's happening to them. Of course, a community that burns to the ground does not regrow. That is synthetic, that is a different animal. So getting to your question, there's a lot we can do. I just finished a deep exploration of the subject of the research that the insurance industry has done, that the U.S. Forest Service has done, and that the Underwriters Laboratory, Fire Safety Research Institute, that people have seen in the field. Jesse's been on a lot of big fires, a lot of intense fires, and he's seen a lot in the field. And a lot of those folks wanted to try to figure out in the fire services and fire response, what is leading to homes igniting and burning.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fascinating. The condition of vegetation, more than 100 feet from the home, is almost irrelevant. The type or the condition of it, more than 100 feet from the home, is pretty much irrelevant to whether the home ignites and burns. Now, you might want to thin in that vegetation around a community, create operable space for firefighters. Yes, you might want to do some things in more favorable conditions to slow the fire down. But in a wind-driven fire event, the flames are bent down to the ground, and you have embers ahead of the flame front, gathering at the house, entering the attic, entering the crawl space through the venting, right? Igniting things adjacent to the house that then ignite the house. And then the house becomes the fuel that ignites another house.
Yes.
That's what's happening. That's the mechanics and physics. So you can figure it out. And frankly, it's really fascinating how easy it is to reduce the chances significantly that your house will ignite and burn. The probabilities of having success there and the durability of that over space and time, contrasted with vegetation management, which is, you got to do every year, if not a couple, 3 times a year, and stay on it, is so high that it really gives me a lot of hope. And there's communities that are doing it with the help of the fire departments and assessments and implementing it at scale. But basically, it's like a weekend project with your middle schooler or high schooler involved, changing out your fine mesh screens with 1/8 material, moving the bark mulch 5 feet from the house, and moving the shrubs is almost the number one thing that the top guy at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, Roy Wright, said will be the hardest challenge is getting people to move their beloved shrubbery. I had a hard time moving my beloved shrubbery, so I get it. But I think it's the 0 to 5 feet. That's number one, the house, and 5 feet out. And then 5 to 30, like if you have a juniper, get the juniper, because those things torch real hot. Get the cypress, get that away from your structure, even if you liked it, because those things have a lot of tannins, and they wind bent over, they torch, they can crack a window on your house.
Yeah, they're like Roman candles
These
when
really
they go.
interesting nerd out things that I could go on and on about, all this cool research that's been done. But long story short is everyone has a lot of agency over their house. And then if collectively do it in a community, right,
Yeah.
you can eliminate the edge of the wildland fire interacting with the structures on the edge. You can eliminate this. And so I would just say that, you know, Jesse's been on Dixie, Thomas, Camp, and Paradise, uh, and many more. Tubbs. I don't know if you've been on Tubbs, Glass Fire. But in any event, sometimes it looks random, but maybe Jesse, you can share from your observation and experience about wildfire prepared homes and what people can do.
So absolutely. In regards to some great data that came out of the campfire that occurred in Paradise, in regards to the homes that burned when the age of that occurred and how many lived after a certain type of age. And you see it because it's just as Ralph was mentioning, the speed at which, especially wind-driven mega fires is going, it's going so fast. And the campfire is burning a football field and a half every second. It went from a distance of almost 7.5 miles in an hour. So you're getting that dramatic ember cast that's going out there. And once that gets into a building, it almost makes it almost impossible for us to be able to mitigate that when you have so many other homes. So preventing that initial ignition start is key for us. Because once it gets into the attic, you just don't have the resources. When you look at some of these larger fires, because obviously we want to keep fires to a very minimum level. Most of the fires are started by human cause. The other component is usually lightning. And that's why we have tried to do a rapid response, mitigate it with under 10 acres. That's the goal that's out there. But when you have wind conditions and dry fuel moisture, sometimes that can be challenging.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 5,000 firefighters eventually getting on these larger incidents to try to mitigate them. But even though that seems like a lot, those are multiple days going into it. On those initial attack components, you don't have those type of resources to be able to go in and fight every single house. So giving us the ability to go, okay, we have some defensible space within that first 5 feet around there. You've done those conditions to help mitigate any embers that can be getting into the attic. Because once it gets into the attic, it's challenging.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Ralph, you both brought up some really interesting points. One, you brought up the nerd in me because you brought up the Pleistocene, being a geologist. I'm like, yay. And then you brought up the insurance nerd with me, talking about the insurance industry, which is challenged right now. You know, insurance companies are not able to remain profitable. They are a for-profit industry. And if they can't cover the wildfire, they just don't do it. So that's a huge challenge, not only in the state of California, but several other states, and a whole nother topic. But talking about the mitigation strategies, you know, just so people understand, you know, wood chips around your house, bad idea. Shrubbery around your house, bad idea. Wood decks, bad idea. You want nothing that's going to catch on fire. And correct me if I'm wrong, this cannot be a house by house issue. This has to be community wide.
Yep.
Simply hardening one house amongst 700, that's not going to save it. And being prepared is important. But I do want to point out, Ralph, in your movie Elemental, it was a terrifying opening scene of how fast wildfire goes. And Jesse, you brought up, it's what, one football field in 3 or 5 seconds?
Yeah, football field and a half per second.
Per second. You cannot outrun that. You cannot outdrive that. And
no,
I don't think
I mean, I would just say, like, look, fire departments, some of the folks in the fire departments that are doing structural fire also work wildland fire by choice. Some are working wildlife fire by reality. Okay. And folks that are doing the firefighting are firefighters and they are fire survivors. And the reality is that they can't be everywhere all at once, putting wet stuff on the red stuff. In those situations like Paradise, you would need all the firefighters from all of California in that community, probably in less than an hour, to have a chance of saving a third of the homes, gassed up with adequate water supplies. So you have to understand the reality of the scope and magnitude. You know, if you have 600 homes, like in the Woolsey fire in Malibu, in the fire's path, and you have serpentine road systems and cul-de-sacs and people that haven't done the thing. So the number one thing we can do to support fire services is not cheer them on during the fire. It's important to show up for them during the fire, but to do the things in advance before fire comes, so they know which houses have had the things done, and we give them greater odds of success in defending a community. We give ourselves greater odds of success. And I think that the other piece you asked about, like, can we put out wildland fires? Well, part of the reason we're having a lot more fire in some landscapes is because we put out fire and excluded fire for so long. Some landscapes, about a third of our forested landscapes, are arguably, denser than they should be.
Yeah.
So, like I said, some forested landscapes burn regularly hot. That's how they burn. So, it's more of a nuanced conversation. We can't blanket say that. But, in many cases, when these fires are more than 10 acres, I mean, in the wilderness, you can't put them out.
Yeah.
So there's a perception that the problem is in the forest. So we focus on veg, or we just need more firefighters and we need them just to put them out. Well, if you have a power line ignited fire from like the campfire, which is a 1910 C-clamp, PG&E, failed in a wind event, it's going to start a fire. And before you know it, it's going to be bigger than you can do anything about. And so you're doing, I think what the movie tried to make clear is firefighters are nothing short of heroic, right?
Very true.
And there's limits to what they can do, which is hard for the public to hear sometimes. And if the public thinks, okay, they can just put the stuff out, then why would they be motivated to do the things to their house? And I think what the climate, the wind, the drought, these fire events are telling us is that the number one thing we can do is prepare ourselves. And what's great is it feels good to put a fire coat on your house. It allows you to chill a little bit more with the world events around you.
Very true. And, I like the fact that as homeowners, as individuals, we have to maintain accountability for maintaining our homes and making them more not fireproof, but fire resistant. And that is important for people to think about. Jesse, can I ask you what your personal opinion or professional opinion is about prescribed burn?
So they're the same in regards to professional and personal. They're very useful. We engage in them all the time. It's harder than people think, though, in regards to a fire department. Is you go look back at New Mexico, prescribed burn that got away, that burned hundreds of homes, was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of risk associated with it, and that's why we train on it. We do our absolute best, but the conditions have to be right, and the types of fuel have to be right. We just can't go up on the hillside and heavy undergrown brush and light that off, because the potential to get that out there is pretty big. But we try to utilize as much as possible. It's definitely a tool that we like to use, but there is a risk, especially on the fire side, in regards to liability.
Oh yeah, I mean, you have to know what you're doing. Just so people know, I mean, I met Ralph through an organization called After the Fire. It's a 501c3, helps people with resilience after wildfire happens, but they're also focused on mitigation. And it was during last year's annual event that I saw Ralph's movie. Ralph, is your movie public yet? Is it open for the public?
It'll be on streaming this week, basically, June 13th on Amazon, Apple, Google, and Vimeo streaming. And then it's broadcast in Europe.
Yeah, it's called Elemental. It's a fabulous movie, and it will terrify you how loud a wildfire is and how quickly they move. But we also learned during that event was prescribed burns. And if not trained properly, it will get out of control. So you have to know what you're doing. And it does actually work, because I think it was in your movie where you showed like forests, one was untreated, one was thinned, and one was thinned and prescribed burn. And then a wildfire went through it. And the one with the prescribed burned and the thinning was the healthiest afterwards.
Yeah, so the film is Elemental Reimagine Wildfire, elementalfilm.com. And we spend a lot of time with the 𝐖𝐢𝐥𝐝, Cultural Fire Management Council in Northern California. And they're bringing fire back, but they're doing a lot of fire around homes. So they prepare the home. They have an elder fire program and a home fire program. So they're burning around homes, because the number one thing that's going to slow a fire down is coming in contact with a previously burned area. If it's interesting. So mechanical thinning by itself without fire has not been shown to be effective. It can be mechanical thinning plus fire, or just prescribed fire in the right conditions like Jesse talks about. So scaling that up is going to be hard. And so the �𝐢𝐥𝐿 are really focusing in and around their communities. There's some other landscapes that they want to restore fire to or remove invasives from. It's really hard when you have invasive species like cheatgrass really carries the fire fast. The challenges are the landscape is so vast, Wendy, that if you try to, address a certain area, the odds that area will burn before it grows back are really quite low. Kind of a shot in the dark, given hundreds of millions of acres of land, whether it's grassland, shrubland, and it's also, again, a nuanced and somewhat paradoxical area, because in Southern California, these landscapes are burning too frequently from human-caused ignitions, and chaparral is converting to cheatgrass. So some landscapes are burning too frequently, some it's being fire excluded, and like in the 𝐿𝐢𝐿, it is so rugged. You're talking, slopes like the Alps covered with vegetation. That's a challenging environment to bring fire back to at scale, right? So I think ultimately, yes, more fire on the land, managed wildfire. If it's in a wilderness, there is a risk that a wind event could come when you're doing that. That's happens in Oregon twice now. Wind event has come to a managed wildfire, and then almost one case partially burned into a community, and another case smoked out a community for a month. So we have to tolerate and live with more fire on the land, both that we're igniting intentionally, prescribed and culturally reasons, and managed wildfire is kind of the takeaway, right? So if anybody's going to promise a person less smoke, they can't deliver that, and it doesn't make sense to deliver it, because all you're doing is putting it off to another day.
Jesse's just shaking his head.
Yeah, I feel like we live in smoke year round. Doesn't really, I say year round, but most of the summer we have extensive smoke, and so it was like you said, it was a little bit interesting seeing how the East Coast reacted to those levels of smoke, because my wife was commenting like, wow, those are about the levels that we have almost every single year that sit down here. So yeah, it's challenging. And so it's funny listening to Ralph talk about that, because I've been on quite a few fires in the Klamath, and when he's talking about the slope, he's not joking. It's so steep in certain areas there. We'll do hose lines up, and you use the hose to pull yourself up the hill. And I'm not exaggerating. That's how steep some of the terrain is. Yeah, Klamath is a challenging place to fight fires.
And I can imagine getting the water up there, getting access to water. And one of the things that people should also know is, if there's a fire in your area, please do not turn on your sprinklers. That is draining the water supply the firefighters need. It's a bad idea. Sorry,
it doesn't necessarily help. So yeah, because it's going to evaporate. We're talking fires that are occurring when it's 100 degrees out. Water is going to almost immediately evaporate. It's those long-term fuel moistures that you're starting to see when you have live and dead fuel moistures in those critical levels. Temporary applying water is not going to make a significant change.
Yeah, I want to just share a little bit of math. Okay, so yeah, I've been nerding out on the home science thing, but the math part, like, let's think about scale, right? So we got these business plans. We're going to go thin vegetation. I think if you took that business plan to a bunch of venture capitalists and they said, are you going to get your return on your objective, which is less fire on the landscape or safer communities? They look at broad landscape scale vegetation management, and they would not invest. Reason being, at least for safety, right? For home and community safety, it doesn't achieve that objective over space and time. You have $5 billion additional dollars being allocated right now, and you divide that by 2,000 an acre, and you get 2.5 million acres. And that's a one-time alteration of the vegetation on 2.5 million acres that may or may not burn before it grows back. And we've got hundreds of millions of acres of land, and all of it has vegetation that can contribute to home and structure loss, right? Most home loss in California occurs in grasslands and shrublands. The Inspector General asked the Forest Service not too long ago, how long would it take you to treat a portion of the landscape deemed to be at highest risk? 60 to 90 years was the answer. And they didn't even do the math on the cost. The Republicans have just done the math on the cost, and they said it'd take 140 billion to do a portion of the landscape deemed at high risk. So if people think we're going to get to a different future through vegetation management broadly, no is the answer. Is there a place to do vegetation management? Yes, around your home, around your community, maybe in a drinking watershed because it's an asset you want to protect, maybe in an area that has been altered by past management. Sure, there are areas where it makes sense. But I think what's really interesting is let's look at California's spending, leaving aside fire suppression dollars. 98% goes to veg management, less than 2% goes to home and community prep. Are the insurance companies sticking around because of this great plan? No. I would want to be very blunt about that. I think, it's interesting that vegetation management can be beneficial, but it's taken up most of the oxygen and money. And I think that what we're seeing now is the insurance companies are clearly signaling you need a wildfire prepared home, and then we can talk about insuring you. That's what we saw in Paradise when we visited recently. When we were down there for the premiere of Elemental, Reimagine Wildfire. We went up to Paradise and visited the first wildfire prepared home. And the guy that did it had lost his home in the fire, he and his wife. And they have 3 offers from different insurance companies to carry them at reasonable rates.
That's fantastic.
So, that's is what the insurance industry is looking at. 0 to 5 feet, 5 to 30. If you have that, some people, of course, their neighbors at 5 feet, the fence is at 5 feet. So 0 to 5 makes sense. So anyway, I think that there are reasons for us to engage in forest health treatments. Those are not related to whether homes and communities burn down. There are reasons for us to do things in the forest. In general, is what we learned from Jack Cohen. In the beginning, when we were told this, Wendy, when we started our journey on the film, Tripp and I didn't believe it. Tripp Jennings, the director, and I didn't believe it. And we set out sort of to prove that wrong. And we found out that it was actually true. And now we're seeing what we were seeing all along is the slow pot that was boiling, which is the insurance industry willing to stay in California, is now boiling over. Of, hey, these efforts that you have been making for the last 3 decades and that you're investing in currently now aren't related to our risk calculation.
That's very true. The insurance side of things can get very complicated, and a lot of people don't realize these are for-profit industries. If they are going to lose money, they are not going to do it anymore. It's a business. And that's why we need to do the mitigation techniques and house hardening in the defensive space to bring them back, to make them comfortable to come back. And there's a myriad of other ideas I have, but I'll save you that information.
Right.
Insurance.
They're going to look at the research, not the mythology or the dominant cultural belief. They're going to look at the actual data that shows how you keep a home from igniting and burning, not what someone says, oh, we're going to finger point at the forest adjacent to us, or that is irrelevant to them because they want to look at how it actually happens, so they can, because they can't know where wildfire will burn. We can't, right? That's how it works with insurance. You're assessing risks that you don't know where they'll manifest. And what you're trying to do is reduce that risk to the point where you can say, I'm going to offer you a contract to cover your bacon in case it gets crispy. It makes total sense that they're exiting because the FAIR plan is undercapitalized and a variety of other things are going on where they see the writing on the wall and they're like, we can't handle this. But we can fix this problem. We can reduce the risk and keep reasonable insurance rates. I believe it can be done.
Absolutely. No, I fully support that. And I've been saying that for probably 5 years for my friends in the insurance industry, Jennifer Gray Thompson, who's the CEO of After the Fire. I probably even bored you to death when we were chatting at your movie premiere.
No, I love learning. I've learned a lot.
I'm sorry?
I love learning. I love learning from Jesse. I love learning from everybody in the film that I've met along the way. Going to conferences has been a very generative experience for me. So thank you for sharing your wisdom, Wendy. And Jesse.
And Jesse, definitely.
So what I loved about, there's a lot of things I loved about Ralph's movie, but one of them was there's this misnomer that it's the house in the middle of the forest that's burning down. And so us in the fire service, we're trying to go and explain, hey, we're seeing things that we've never seen before. Cities, little cities, Redding, Santa Rosa, where it's coming in and burning shopping centers, commercial districts, on the glass fire, vineyards, large vineyards that were surrounded completely good, that were burning down, that we just in the fire service, when I traditionally started, you just did not think that those areas would burn. I personally never thought I was going to see Safeways burn down, and that occurs now. So it's not affecting larger, more dense, more suburban areas. It is. And so most people don't realize that.
No, our idea of what a wildfire is completely changing. And just so people know, I avoid acronyms. So when you hear the word WUI, that's the Wildland Urban Interface, WUI. I personally hate it when people use it, because when I first heard it, I was Googling WOOIE, wondering what the heck's a WUI. So that's Wildland Urban Interface. It just means between the city and the forest, that little area, because there is urban sort.
And really, frankly, look, it's a term trying to identify a narrower band of the landscape that's at risk, right? Yeah. Where the wildlands interface with development. Frankly, look, if you have a house and you're out in the wildlands, you actually have a greater chance, because you can control your destiny, if you're more than 100 feet from your neighbor's house that might torch at 2,500 degrees and burn with synthetic materials and ignite your house. If you got the distance, you can do the things and greatly reduce your risk, and you don't need the community's participation in that. Now, of course, you don't want your neighbors to burn down. No. That's a really hard situation, and I have friends whose houses survived or who lost their houses, and then some neighbors didn't, and that's not a fun place to be. But I think the point being around what Jesse is talking about in the wildland urban, in the fire services and Jack Cohen's trainings, it's like this is where we believe most of the action is, or where most of the threat is. And in Colorado, there was the Marshall Fire, burned Superior, Louisville, and unincorporated parts of Boulder County in open space, grassland, wasn't even on a risk map, definitely wasn't defined as wildland urban interface. It was on the Front Range. So I think that this dimension really says, okay, yeah, you do need fuel, you do need vegetation, but the risk is kind of everywhere in the West right now. If you have an ignition and if you have a wind event, and already if this fuel moisture, soil moisture is really low. In other words, you have the conditions for a very fast moving fire. And once it gets into a community and starts igniting the houses, then it becomes even more challenging in those dimensions. And those are the kinds of fires we've been seeing for a number of years now, increasingly becoming challenging. And the only solution for that really is the home hardening, right? Yeah. Plus well-trained fire departments who know where that's occurred.
Oh, absolutely.
Participating in good evac and preparation. So I think that it means like we need to question, do we recalibrate our state and federal spending, which I think the public believes is occurring primarily to make them safer. Sometimes it's occurring with performative acts, right? And that's what was so refreshing about reading that Inspector General report, where they were just like, yeah, we're doing these things because the public expects us to, but we know it's not accomplishing the objective that they think it is. So, it's pretty, in some ways, pretty tough message for people to hear, because it means maybe some career change, maybe some reallocation of vast public monies. I'm not saying completely away from that, but of course, we don't have endless supplies, and we have constant fights over how much, and it's never enough. So I just think we need to examine very closely with the insurance companies exiting, which has a huge impact on property values and so many things.
The ability to buy a house.
That maybe the public dollar should go to where we're seeing amazing gains, like in Truckee, Marin, Berkeley, Malibu, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, Aspen, a bunch of communities. They're on a very short rotation. Every house is getting assessed in Truckee once every 3 years. 74% of the people there are doing the things. The local bonding measures for the fire departments, the fire services, to do the assessments. The assessments are getting loaded up into people's apps on their phones, and it prioritizes and makes it very accessible for what they can do. So it's really interesting when I think there's public money spent and it creates this multiplier effect and it empowers people to do things. And I wasn't as aware until being out there with the film and meeting and being in these communities and learning more about what was happening, that actually there's a pile of communities that are ranging, and there's some definite equity issues in there. But it looks like the American Red Cross is going to enter the space of home assessments. It looks like NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, is ramping up a program in that space. The insurance industry is, and just local communities are doing it with local bonding measures for their most trusted people, their fire departments. And it's pretty exciting. And I think that there's a workforce piece and this need for us to elevate and amplify the people in our community that are helping us prepare the community, because the catastrophic losses are not sustainable. I mean, they're horrible humanitarian disasters, and really hard for people to come back from them and communities to come back from them. The cost of those are like, and the cost of hardening, I think, is probably here in comparison.
Oh yeah, the psychological effect is gigantic. But before as we close out, because we've gone over 30 minutes, how can people find you? Or Jesse, I don't know if you have an organization that helps people with house hardening, or helping people figure out, what do I do? How do I fix this? How can
I mentioned there was quite a few things that I just really loved about Ralph's film. You watch that film, it gets you excited. You're like, oh, they're looking at a different way to handle this. And what was great at the end, there's a link. They're right there that tells you where to go, a lot of information to be able to follow up, and like, oh, okay. As opposed to you walk out of the theater or turn off the TV and you're like, oh, well, I guess I need to go do some research. He lines it out right there for you.
Brilliant.
And so I think that's fantastic.
I love that. And Ralph, do you want one final plug for your movie that's now going to be public? Guys, you got to see it. It's amazing. It's terrifying but enlightening at the same time.
Yeah, so elementalfilm.com, you can find the streaming links and watch the movie. And there's profiles of all the folks in the film. Jesse's profiled and others are profiled on the website. And then there's a link to the Wildfire Prepared Home. And then, you can go to your local FireWise lead and ask about a home assessment. You can check in with your fire department. If they hear from you, hey, we want a home assessment, maybe then if they don't have a program, they'll try to figure out how to start having a program. So there's a lot of things both people can do individually. And then I think to the extent that there's a bonding measure, or you elevate or amplify the people in the community doing the things around home and community preparation, that's definitely another thing. You can step after you've done your home to engaging in, I think with your neighbors. They're like, hey, curious, what are you doing? Send them to the Wildfire Prepared Home website that's out there, or to get them to watch Elemental Film. So you don't have to tell them why. The film will tell them why, right?
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, the film doesn't tell them why. The film presents you with A, B, and you're the viewer. Figure out equals C. And I think that that's the way that we have to communicate with folks these days. It really is presenting and respecting others with with the information, so they can decide for themselves. That's really what we try to do with Elemental Reimagine Wildfire. I
love that messaging. Let people make their own conclusions, draw their own conclusions. That's great. So on that, guys, Jesse, Ralph, thank you so much for your time today. I know you are both extremely busy, so spending these 40 minutes with me is wonderful. I appreciate your time, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. Jesse, for running towards the fire, not away from it, and Ralph, reporting how devastating the fires are. You have my gratitude for that. So guys, I'm Wendy Nystrom, your host with Environmental Social Justice. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Good to see you, Ralph.
Thank you for having us, Wendy.
Absolutely. This was a huge pleasure and extremely knowledgeable. So thank you again.